Hey guys, welcome to the Great Debate Community. I'm Richard. Today we are talking about presuppositionalism. Specifically, I'm not a presuppositionalist, but I'm a Christian. And so the title is Why Christians Should Not Use Presuppositional Apologetics. We actually have a presuppositionalist in here. His name is Gary. So we've got some atheists in here, so we should have an interesting discussion. Basically, we're discussing Van Tilian presuppositionalism. Now, Van Tilian presuppositionalism is the idea that before you can know anything at all, you have to presuppose the Christian worldview. And if you don't do that, if you don't have that necessary starting place, then you won't be able to make any sense out of reality. So I think that I can clear up maybe some misunderstandings of what presup is, answer bad objections, and then go through a few objections that I think are pretty robust to this methodology, because there is a pretty significant debate among Christian apologists about whether they should engage in presuppositional apologetics. A lot of it will center around pious reasoning, like presuppositionalists will sometimes suggest that their methodology is more pious. That might not be too concerning to atheists, but it is to Christians. So I'm not sure if you guys are even familiar with that, but either way, we might get into that today. But I guess to start off, why don't we talk to some of the guys here? You guys know anything about presuppositionalism? You have anything to chime in? Gary, why don't we start with you, since you are our presuppositionalist? You there?
Yep.
Yeah, why don't you tell us what the methodology is, how the argument works?
It depends which. You said Van Til, didn't you?
Van Tilian.
Yeah. So Van Tilian presuppositionalism works on the methodology of trying to get to the basis of all knowledge. Van Tilian presuppositionalism starts with that the only way you can know anything is with the existence of God, because otherwise you have an unfirm starting point for all knowledge. Because if you're basing it upon like science is flawed, or you're basing it upon, let's say, for example, philosophical truths, they're flawed because they're based upon inferences which are based upon things that we can only know in certain philosophical truths. So they point out to the fraud. So
they'll say
that. Again, it's more complex than that, but that's the Cliff Notes version.
Yeah. So to know anything, you first have to assume that God exists. That would
no. It's not. It's assumption. It's based upon certain philosophical, certain truths in reality.
Yeah. All right. Carrie, you want to jump in? I see you're typing things out in the side chat.
Well, that was kind of the question you just asked. I was wanting to know if he was saying that this was an assertion concerning how knowledge is known, or if it's the conclusion of a argument that is both sound and valid.
Oh yeah, no. So presuppositionalism wouldn't argue like that. They wouldn't say, I have this fact, therefore God exists. They would say God exists, therefore you have facts. So you have to start with the assumption that God exists for there to know any facts. And beyond that, they would say that they wouldn't say therefore that atheists don't know anything. They would usually, like if you're talking about Sci-10 Bruggencate or some of the other popular level guys, they'll say something like atheists already believe that God exists, and on that basis they can know things about the world. So this would take us to the idea that everybody know that God exists according to the presuppositionalist.
In the pre-section here, we were talking, you mentioned something about Bertrand Russell. There was a discussion that we're doing recently, actually. Each week we're doing a chapter of this book, The Problems of Philosophy. There was a specific section where he basically took the very humble approach, stating that there's not really anything that you could claim to know with absolute certainty beyond the fact that you have like sense data coming into your mind, and that sense data is not under your control in any way. So that your consciousness is essentially being assaulted, is the word he used.
Yeah. So the way the presuppositionalist will respond to that is to say something like, okay, then you're admitting that you don't actually know anything, which would put you in a pretty unsavory position. How would
you would be inaccurate to say you don't know anything, because you are still starting with the acknowledgement that your mind is there and that you're perceiving something and you're labeling it accurately. Yeah. Or at least you're labeling it. You're going through the process of applying the first law of logic of identifying something as A is A and B is B. Mm-hmm. So you've already got like a trifecta going on of stability to start discussing. Now you may wish to continue down the humble road and try to say that you will never know anything absolutely, but as long as you can show that it's a reliable system, that's all the humble man would ever need to do.
Yeah, I've heard presuppositionalists respond to this, and what they'll usually say is something like, well, the mechanism that you're using to prove that you have a reliable system is interpreted through the reliable system. So it'd be kind of circular in that sense.
It would depend on if you consider the mind to be axiomatic. I mean, if you start the conversation saying that you can't deny the existence of your own mind, then any facet that is clearly a function of your mind being used couldn't be considered fallacious. It would simply be a properly basic beginning point of the discussion.
Yeah, so I don't know if they would deny the existence of the mind, but they might say something like, well, maybe your mind isn't working right. So how, like they might ask, how do you know that?
Well, that's a question of existence, not your mind. If you are willing to acknowledge that you have a mind and that you're willing to acknowledge the fundamental truth of the statement something exists, then you are capable of already acknowledging that your mind is doing some form of labeling about what it perceives to be existence. You're not claiming that it's an absolute. You're not even claiming that it's the real existence. It's simply the only game in town. There isn't any other option.
Yeah, so what you're saying is, okay, but you can already establish these facts.
Right, you've established existence is as you see it. It doesn't matter if it's true or not. You established that you are a mind using the law of identity to label your environment, and you are a mind doing all of this. And from that, you're basically getting into the fundamental structure of you have no choice but to accept reality as it is, and that your reason is your means of interacting with reality.
Yeah.
And that essentially ends all metaphysical discussion at that point, because there's no reason to question any of it.
Yeah, so guys, what we're basically talking about is what's known as the transcendental argument for God's existence, which would basically say that God would be the ontological foundation for reason, the laws of logic, and pretty much anything that's transcendent. We might include morals in that, and it might surprise you to learn that it can actually be flipped and used as an evidentialist argument. The way that we commonly hear it would be Van Tilian presuppositionalism, but there are more robust forms of this argument. So yeah, it's the transcendental argument. I see we have Luke in here. Hey, Luke, how's it going?
Going good. Just got back from a long drive, so I'm still catching up with the conversation.
Yeah, we're just talking about what we just started. We're talking about presuppositionalism as an apologetic methodology, and we've got atheists in here, and I think we still have one presuppositionalist. So you have any beginning thoughts on presup? Luke, you there?
Hey, sorry, my connection is really bad right now, so I'm going to be dropping out for a little bit, but I'll be back in a second.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So we kind of explored one problem with presuppositionalism. I'd like to go through another one. So okay, I think and this really cuts to the core of presuppositional apologetics. Even if you grant presuppositional apologetics, Christian theology could still be false. Now, what do I mean? Well, so presuppositionalism is basically the idea that the Christian worldview is the only thing that can rationally explain the rest of the world. Like if you start with something else, if you start with atheism or Islam or something, you won't have the ontological foundation to explain the rest of the world. But the thing is, even if that's true, even if Christianity is the only possible thing thing that you can think of that's compatible with the rest of the world, that's internally and externally coherent, it wouldn't follow that Christianity is true. So this methodology, even if granted, even if you grant like every step of the argument, you still wouldn't get to Christian theology. You would, at most, you'd be able to say it's internally and externally coherent. And the thing is, we could conjure up other worldviews that are also internally and externally coherent. You would just have to think of a worldview that makes no evidential claims and is simple enough to not have any internal contradictions. With that, you could pretty much account for anything within the natural world. You'd be internally and externally coherent, but that wouldn't prove that it would be true. And I think that would be the central problem with Presup. Now, Gary, you're our Presup. We've gone through a few of what we perceive as problems. Maybe you can come back on that.
Well, the thing is that I don't hold to Van Til's version.
Oh yeah.
I don't hold to the Side-Time Brood and Kate version because I think Side-Time Brood and Kate has ruined the argument. Yeah. I'm trying to be diplomatic about that, but I think he has. I think that the actual argument, which was made, Van Til was a smart guy.
Van Til was a philosopher. He's definitely a smart guy.
Like Greg Boxer was a smart guy. St. Anselm was a smart guy. Side-Time Brood and Kate is not a smart guy. I don't mean that as a slam. I'm just being honest. I understand that that people think there are problems. And if you were to say, oh yeah, there's problems with the way that Side-Time Brood and Kate presents his argument, I'd definitely agree with that. But I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with the argument as is, because I think we all do it. Because before we make any decision, we all question whether it's going to be the correct one, because we don't know. Because again, we never know what the outcome's going to be, and I think that's the whole point of the apologetic: is what is the more likely outcome considering the information we currently have.
How do you think you would improve or how could the argument be improved that would avoid the objections that Carrie and myself have raised?
How would I improve it? I don't think it can be improved because it's like any argument. If it becomes famous through one way, that's the way it becomes famous. And when you say you are something, that's the way that argument becomes famous. It's like, for example, if, for example, you're an atheist and you use, let's say, Richard Dawkins' arguments against Christianity, for example, those arguments have problems with them that you can poke holes in. Yeah. And if that becomes famous, it doesn't matter what else you argue. If I can poke holes in that particular argument, your argument sort of fails at the face value, even if you don't hold to that particular argument. And that's the problem that presuppositionalism has, is that Side-Time Brood and Kate has been the worst thing to happen to it. He's the one who's popularized it. He's the one who had a debate. I think he's had numerous debates. He had one with Matt Dillahunty that I know about. I don't know if he's had any others. Yeah. People in chat can probably tell me if he's had any others, but that's one that I know about.
Yeah, most of the debates that I've seen have been on YouTube in formats kind of like this one, where he's taking on. And honestly, I think in a lot of the debates that Sai has, I think a lot of the people don't understand the argument very well. So a lot of them will say things like, I know that my reasoning faculties are functional because other people tell me that they are, because I can put it through a machine or something like that. And I honestly think that's not a good counter argument. And maybe Carrie will come back to that. Maybe he thinks it is.
No, I agree with you, and I think it's self-refuting, because if you can use someone else to confirm, then we can use someone else to confirm. So it's a sword that cuts both ways.
So I do think that he's right. That is kind of, it's circular in that regard, but
I don't think it is, because the actual, if you want to say Side-Time Brood and Kate's version is, I would actually.
I'm not saying I is circular. I'm saying a lot of atheists don't understand his argument, and they are responding circularly.
No, no, no. I mean that's what I mean. That,
Okay.
like, I think that the way that he puts his argument forward is designed to be circular,
Oh
or
yeah,
you arguing in a circular manner, because this is the way that I've described the way he formulates the presuppositional argument. It makes it a lot like, and I don't know, probably you Americans will understand this more than somebody like me from UK. It's like a telephone caller. They have a script that is very circular that they work from. If you've ever worked in telesales or something like that, so it works from, well, this person's going to say this, so I'm going to go to that particular dialogue tree, part of my dialogue tree, and then if they say this, I'm going to go to this part. It is it is designed to be frustrating because they want to get the other person frustrated to point either A, quit, or B, start insulting the person. That is what it's designed to do. It's not designed to further any sort of conversation.
Yeah, the thing is, I think that's one of the big attractions of presuppositionalism. Because look, if you get into evidential apologetics, it'll require you to kind of start learning about different disciplines. Like if you're studying the Kalam cosmological argument, you have to learn about science, you have to learn about philosophy, cosmology. But if you're learning about presuppositional, like Van Tilian presup, all you really need is the script. And it's pretty easy to memorize. And once you get the hang of it, then you're good to go. But if you're in evidential apologetics, it's a lot more daunting. So I think that's one of the big attractions of this methodology. Another thing that I hear from presuppositionalists a lot is the whole piety thing. Like it's what I've called the fallacy of piety, where you wrap a bad argument in pious language and say that you've won because your argument is more pious than your opponent, or rather than other Christians. Because, for example, I would be on the evidentialist side, which would mean that I would use probabilistic arguments that I would think yield a higher certainty that God exists, but not an absolute certainty. And someone like Sai would object to that by saying that I'm being impious because my argument isn't yielding absolute certainty, whereas his starts with absolute certainty. And I think that's what I call the fallacy of piety, because just because a position is more pious doesn't mean that it's the right one. Hey, we have Ned Purdom. Ned, how's it going? Oh wait, sorry, I didn't. Okay, there we go.
There we go. How's it going, guys?
Yeah, I went to the wrong guy. Sorry about that.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah, I didn't expect you to be here. How have you been?
Oh, not bad. I didn't either. I literally just got through doing stuff about 5 minutes ago and saw this. I'm like, oh, that's pretty interesting. So,
this is a topic that you're into?
Oh yeah, I mean, probably my most watched video. It's about me talking to 3 presups. So
yeah. The only videos I've seen of yours were about the moral argument. The whole thing that we were talking about before.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what would you say are the central points that you've made in your videos?
Which one? The moral or?
No, presup.
Well, basically presup, there's 2 main problems with presup, in that, number one, if they're, well, I don't know what you guys are talking about, so I don't want to jump into the middle and kind of derail everything.
No, it's Van Tilian presuppositionalism, and we're just kind of giving broad strokes objections right now. So,
yeah, I mean, my attack point is going to be definitely along Van Til. I don't like Van Til whatsoever. I don't like Seitan Brudenkate. I don't like how that's spun off into Calvinism, and basically they're playing the Calvinist game of, you're not there so much to talk and try to figure out what's true. You're just there to literally, what John Calvin said, is close the mouths of the obstreperous. And I have I have very little tolerance for that. Yes. So again, if you've got a religion that is based on quelling truth and trying to discourage conversation. That to me is a huge red flag. And it seems that at least from the Van Tilian side, and specifically from the Psi-10, clone side, the Psi-clones, it's all about shutting down conversation.
Yeah, that is a major problem that I have with that approach to Van Tilianism, because it's like, oh, okay, you have the transcendental argument and you can get that point across, but when you see these debates like Psi-10 Bruggenkate's debates, it's the only point that he's willing to make. Like he'll just repeat it again and again, and it's like, why can't you make that point and move on to something else? And he'll say like, oh, well, it's the pretty fundamental thing. But I don't know, I think you can drive that point home pretty hard without being impolite or shutting down the whole conversation. And really, I think discussions like this are about trying to understand what the person with whom you disagree has to say. I don't know, I think if you're just saying like, how do you know that? How do you know that? Then you're not doing that. You're shutting it down rather than opening the door to the conversation. So yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, and it's twofold, because it's also being disingenuous in passing yourself off as if you do have absolute knowledge, which I think I can pretty definitively demonstrate that, in fact, the knowledge that they claim to have is at least as bad as what I have, as far as certainty. And I think I can argue worse in that at least I can get to hard solipsism to where I know I exist. Mm-hmm. Whereas an omni-God wipes that out. You can't even be sure of your own existence.
But your own existence, you can't be sure of.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
I said, but the thing is with presuppositionalism, your existence is the only thing you can be sure of. Because the only thing that we know for certain is our own existence. And that's the whole point of presuppositionalism. Certainly of Van Til's presuppositionalism. Yeah, but I don't know what debates you've been having, Pete, that you think that we don't believe that.
Well, but that's what I'm saying, is that you can't have that. At that point, with an omni-God, your existence is not guaranteed.
No, it is.
Well,
wait, what do you mean, Ed? Maybe you can unpack that.
Okay, well, again, if we look at, number one, we can go into scripture and all that if you want to get there, but in broad strokes in general, if I've got an omni-God that is timeless, in the same way that a painter or an artist can use guidelines to start a project, and at the end of the project, those guidelines have literally been erased. They've been taken out of the drawing because now they don't serve a function anymore. Now, those guidelines in our time, the way that we view time and the way that time flows with us, yes, they existed and then were erased. So at one point they existed. Now, if you've got a timeless being, there is nothing that would constrain an omni-God from going back and erasing you before you were ever, as far as the rest of everybody that is viewing the temporal existence that we look at, you could have, all of the effects that you had, all of the things that you did would have been negated from reality. There's nothing constraining a God from doing that. So whereas I know from a natural standpoint, not capital K no, small lowercase no, my existence is assured because I don't know of any way to move throughout time in a, let's say, someone couldn't go back and erase me from the timeline, as far as I can tell. There's no explanatory methodology that would allow for that. Whereas with a God, there's nothing constraining him for that. So as unlikely as it is, there is still a possibility, non-zero possibility, that is done. Therefore, your 100% assuredness, your certainty is as certain as I am, you can't hold that anymore.
Yeah, so you're kind of turning the tables on the presuppositionalists, because their whole thing is this epistemology where you can know things because you are certain of God's existence, but now you're saying, well, no, because of your certainty of God's existence, you can't even be sure of your own existence. So let
alone anything else.
Yeah, this is why I like talking to you, because you you turn the table on these arguments in a way that I'd never even heard before. So yeah, that's pretty interesting. Let's see. Gary, you want to come back on that?
No, I'm just like just trying to unpack why P would say that, because again, like the St. Anselm didn't say that for certain. He said that we can understand things in sense of reality. Now you said something that's quite interesting, P. You said that we can't know anything because of a timeless God. But again, the thing is that the universe itself supposed to be timeless. Like, for example, it's infinite. So it started again, what, 2.3 billion years ago, or something? No, sorry, 6.7 billion years ago. Am I correct about those numbers, or incorrect?
But it started at that point.
Around that
time
point.
Began at that point.
Yeah.
14.
So it should have been 14.8, but I'm not going to.
Yeah, 14.
So again, just on the face of it, time itself is conceptual, because again, time as in this universe. What you talk about, time is inside this universe. You talk about time outside of this universe. What exactly are you trying to conceive here?
Gary, I don't think it's just the timelessness thing. I think it's the fact that God, like, it's timelessness along with God's other attributes. Like, God is timeless and He's omnipotent. So, and personal. So if you have all of those attributes, then it would be possible for God to just wipe out the past completely. So in that sense, you wouldn't be able to be sure of your own existence. So I don't think it's just the timelessness thing, because the universe isn't omnipotent.
No, I know it's not. I'm just saying that I'm saying that any universe is contingent on, especially the one we're living in now, is contingent on time moving in a certain linear fashion. So therefore, God going back and changing time is improbable, because it would affect so many things. Like, for example, it would affect the fabric of causality.
No, it's called the 5 minute. It's called the 5 minute argument. Have you ever heard it before?
No, I've never heard of it.
How would you ever prove that the universe wasn't created 5 minutes ago, and everything in history, your mind, all your memories, and everyone else's mind, didn't start existing 5 minutes ago?
Yes, I know that.
Everything you just said about the linearity of time, that also started 5 minutes ago. So everything is still beholden to the idea that it is entirely possible with an omni-God, who is specifically outside of time, to have functioned the universe in this fashion, which means, how do you know anything about your existence? So the very inclusion of an omni-God into the equation causes the problem.
I would also like to add, if God, let's say this being did change it, then how would you actually know that He changed it? Because, you know, even though we can postulate that He could wipe us out of existence, but if He did go back and make a change in life, which you were just not aware of, how would you know?
MP, sorry, we've got to cut you off because you're unhearable, like you're robotic. I can't understand you at all. Yeah. So, so what was you saying? Something about unchangeableness? Did anyone catch it?
No,
not really.
He was going on the idea that how do we not know God has already changed time? Let's say the whole Jesus story. God could have changed time through that.
Yeah,
that's what he.
I think that's pretty much the argument, right? Like a God could have already changed. Okay.
That's worse, MP.
MP, turn your phone off, man. Like, turn your phone off and move away from your system.
Yeah,
sounds like
that might work.
Yeah, that's basically that's the essence of the argument, is that number one, with an omni-God, with the existence of an omni-God, there's no way, number one, like you were saying earlier, I don't want to use your name because I'm not sure if that's right, but anyway, I don't want to dot drop you, is basically it. But number one, you couldn't
call me Gary. That we've spoken many times.
Not you, Gary.
Carrie?
There you go, Carrie. Okay, yeah, good. I can use your name. Okay, so what Carrie was saying is the other kind of horn of that argument is not only is it possible, but then because I usually get the rebuttal of, well, God wouldn't do that and we would know. Well, that's the other horn. How exactly would you know with an omnipotent being that can do anything at any time? There's no way that it would be beyond his capabilities to not, for lack of a better term, wipe the memories of all of his creation. There's no way, as far as I can tell, to reconcile that and at the same time, or in any way, shape, or form, claim objective knowledge with the existence of an omni-God.
Yeah, Gary, and he's not even saying that it's probable that it's happened. I think he'd probably agree that it would be pretty unlikely. But the whole issue is it's the issue.
It's a thought experiment.
It's the issue of certainty again, because the whole crux of the presuppositionalist argument is this idea of, look, I can be certain of things because I'm certain of God, and it just kind of flips that around by saying, well, no, you can't have certainty, like absolute certainty, because of this, because you have this a possibility, at least a possibility, that God has wiped all of history.
That's exactly it. And there's a third leg of it. We can get into that, but if Gary wants to come back on this part, we'll talk about that later. Unless you want me to get into that now?
Gary, you want to come back on it?
No, I'm just waiting for, just in case anyone else wanted to chat, that's all. Because I know that MP was talking and I interrupted him.
Oh, that's all right. No.
A little bit.
It's still got a little residual
there's popping of some sort. It's like a rhythmic popping is occurring.
A rhythmic popping. All right, so what's the third horn?
Rhythm. There you go. That's better.
That's better. So the third leg of this is even if we do live in a naturalistic universe, we could never claim absolute certainty. We can never claim that we have objective knowledge, but nonetheless we could possess objective knowledge, or we could even without having 100% certainty. In other words, let's say that F equals ma is absolutely true. It defines exactly how force how force works. We could never say with 100% certainty that that's it. But let's say that in reality that equation does describe force perfectly. At that point, we do have objective knowledge. Regardless if we know it or not, we do have objective knowledge. Now, with an omni-God, there's no such thing as laws. There's no such thing as, again, let's use F equals ma. If in a universe where F equals ma works, it only works there because God constructed it that way. And I would think it's beyond argument that being omniscient, being the most, being able to do anything he wants to, he could make F equals ma no longer work. So anything that we think we can ground any of our existence in with a belief in an omni-God evaporates. Whereas even if we can't claim absolute certainty, we still can obtain absolute knowledge in a naturalistic world. Does that make sense, or is that too convoluted? Because I know
I think
it makes sense. But the thing is, you can't, because again, humans are prone. I mean, and maybe that you aren't prone to this, to flaw, to make mistakes, to make inferences that aren't there. The thing is that our brains are very prone to outside influences, whether they be drug influence, like for example, certain narcotics, or even not even certain narcotics, but certain things that are even in the atmosphere can cause people to see things that aren't there. Like for example, why people see UFOs and stuff like that can be caused because of like certain atmospheric pressures. So like, and also the thing is that also with that we also make wrong judgments. Like for example, I mean, I know that you're an atheist. You must think, as me as a theist, I am making a wrong judgment when I claim that there is a God out there. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm irrational in some sort of way. It means that you think I'm coming to the wrong judgment about the creation of the universe. So therefore, I've made a wrong inference or a wrong judgment somewhere. So again, so that premise on its face just fails because we all make bad decisions. Would you agree with that?
Well, Gary, but
I have a problem with that when you're done.
Okay.
I mean, you guys are free to jump into it.
I prefaced the entire thing by qualifying it, saying that we could never claim absolute certainty. So the way that, I guess, the analogy that I like to use here is if I stumble across something on a beach, let's say that I pick up a pebble, and it's a nice, pretty kind of, somewhat shiny looking rock, and it's about the size of my fist. Now, I might have just found the largest diamond in the history of the world. By definition, I just became a millionaire. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Now, I can't claim that. I can't say that just by looking at the rock because I'm not a gemologist. I don't know what this rock is. It might just be some quartz. It may just be whatever. Nonetheless, I have found the largest diamond in the history of the world. And I still have it, even if I don't know I have it. So in the same way, if F equals ma describes how force works exactly, the perfect way that our material universe works, if that is the best description, not the best description, the description of how force works, I can't claim that it's objectively true because you're right. I can't, because of the limitations of the human mind, I can't know that, capital K, know that that's the truth. Nonetheless, I do have the right model. I do have the largest diamond ever. So you see what I'm saying? I mean, I can still obtain absolute knowledge. Whereas with a God, there's no such thing as absolute knowledge because everything is subjective due to being subject to God's will and the way God wants it at, quote unquote, this time.
Yeah, so what presuppositionalists like Psi 10 will usually say in response to that point is something like the reason that they are sure of things like not only theological claims but any facts like F equals ma is divine revelation. Like in some way God has revealed things to them in a way that brings about certainty. So
and that's where I have a problem.
Okay.
Can I say something about that?
From my theological background,
Yeah, I'm going to jump in too.
From my theological background, it was always a matter of principle when you're discussing how exactly original sin works with regards to the human race and how the redemption of Jesus was necessary, was because of the entire understanding of a potter's pot, the idea that you now possessed original sin and were flawed. So no matter how many pots were molded off of the original mold, they will all contain the flaw. And no matter what you put into them, it will never be as much as what an unblemished pot would be. This was the kind of nature of how original sin was to work.
Yeah.
So the very idea of anyone saying that they are capable of absolutely conveying accurate or absolute truth in any way is like completely at odds with the idea of original sin.
Well, okay, so there are different conceptions of, like I think we might be talking about different things here. Like I don't know that original sin would include your noetic capacities, like your ability to think. I think it would be more related to your moral capacity. Like like there would just be a difference there in theology. Like some would say that it does impact your noetic capabilities. Others would say it doesn't. It's just your moral capabilities. So I'm not sure. Maybe that would just be a difference in theology and what you were brought up with.
Yeah, I suppose. But the entire purpose of the Jesus redemption line was the fact that it was something we absolutely needed, because there wasn't a facet of us that wasn't in need of redemption. So there wouldn't be, even your mental abilities, anything had to be included in the concept of you being a flawed vessel. So anyone who comes along and then tries to claim that they have some, even if they had access to absolute knowledge, would never possess the capacity to convey it, because they're an imperfect vessel and would never be able to do it.
Yeah, that's a possible way to think about it. I actually have an audience question that I want to field. Trevor Lunn says that I've never fully understood how presuppositionalists have rejected all other gods, and the Christian God is the one that can be presupposed successfully. I think I can answer that from just giving the presup perspective. There are basically two facets of presupposing Christianity. There would be internal and external coherence. So internal coherence would be contradictions within the Christian worldview, and external would be contradictions with the external world. Now, you could say, for example, that Islam has no contradictions with the external world, but a presuppositionalist would say that internally there are contradictions, and so they would say there that you can't presuppose Islam because of these internal contradictions. And that's why I don't think using examples of random deities from other religions would necessarily be the best counterstrike against presuppositionalism, because I think it just misunderstands the argument a little.
Well, I just to add to that, I think it's a simple argument from abduction. They're eliminating or trying to eliminate all of their. It's in Star Trek they have this saying: if you eliminate all of the possibilities, whatever's left must be the thing, the true cause. So and that's what it seems like the presuppositionalists is doing when they attack other religions, or let's say something. They say none of these other work, so by necessity you have to use ours, which is the last one. But by saying that, they also eliminate the fact that they could be wrong, and it could be some of the cause could cause, let's say, the Basal assumptions or whatever they're trying to prove. But argument from abduction.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess getting back to the question that was posited earlier about how do they know that it's God? Again, that's a great question. Yeah. And all you will get is that couldn't an all-powerful God bestow that on me? Well, but also a slightly powerful, say, demon could do the exact same thing. And I think that's where their argument tends to fall apart, in that if you're going to grant the supernatural, you have to, especially if you're going to go and you want to base it on Scripture. Scripture clearly tells us about deceiving demons, deceiving. I mean, God Himself deceives people in the Bible. It specifically says it. So for them to sit there and claim that, oh no, I know this is God, and when you say how, well, because He revealed it to me. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's tease that out, and let's go to the next step and make sure that your source is the correct one. They never want to address that other than just ask, is that a possibility? So throw the possibility back at them and say, couldn't Satan be doing the same thing? And how would you know?
Yeah, I have heard atheists bring that up in debates with Sai, but I can't remember how he responded or how other precept. Do you remember? What does he say to that?
No, that's because, to be honest, I haven't heard anybody hit him with that. And I mean, I think Dillahunty did it in their debate a little bit, and asking him, how do you know it's true? And Sai just kept, Sai's great at sticking to his script. If he's got one thing that is on his side, he is hard to move off of that script. And when you do hit him with something a little bit more nuanced, he'll just circle back. And if I remember right, that's exactly what he did. He's just going, so you're saying God couldn't do that? And Matt. And
Dillahunty was able to expose the fact that he kept saying, really what he's saying is God exists because God exists, and the Bible is true because the Bible is true. And that's all that Sai really brought to the table. He's not really bringing anything else of any substance to it.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, and I guess I think he did just say something like he kind of dodged the question and came back with, well, how do you know that that's the case? Kind of returning to their epistemology rather than focusing on his own. So it would just be a return to the script, I think, if I remember correctly. And Ned, before you came in, we were actually talking a little about the script. Maybe you have a response to this. I think a big appeal of the whole script thing is that it doesn't actually require you to know anything. Like if you're learning evidentialism, you'll have to learn philosophy and science, hopefully. But with presuppositionalism, you really just have to master the script.
I couldn't agree more. And that's what's so ironic about it, is they want to use knowledge as kind of this ending point. I can know things. Well, okay, show me what you do know. And then at that point, it's like you said, it's the script and nothing else. Because anytime you bring up, I mean, like I said, the video that I'm referring to is the one where I had with Bible Thumping Wingnuts, Colin Pearson, and Matthew 3:19, or I think it's Matthew 4:19 or 3:19, whatever his name used to be. And when I started, because the old version of the argument was that God, could change his mind and would change his mind. And they wanted to keep telling me that, God doesn't change. So I went in and specifically wanted to start quoting scripture. But again, as soon as you want to start bringing up scripture to those guys, oh, I don't discuss the Bible with non-believers. Well, that is the most cowardly, just dishonest tactic. I can't stand it. I mean, because again, if you want to talk to me about flight, and let's say that you don't believe that Bernoulli's principle is what causes lift, let's go look at the science. Let's go look at the books. I have got no problem ferreting this out. Why would you, having the one source, at least according to them, of truth, that an all-powerful being, if not penned himself, at least inspired, why can't we use that to vet out these claims?
Yeah, I think they have a reason for that. It comes back to the presuppositional thing. Like, it's interpreting evidence differently. Like, as an atheist, when you read the Bible, you will, according to them, they'll say you'll interpret it within the confines of your worldview, and they'll interpret it within the confines of theirs. So you'd never get anywhere in their mind. You would just be talking past each other because you have different starting points, essentially. So I think in their mind, actually, I have heard them explicit. Okay, someone's making noise. It might be Ned, actually. Okay, so I think in their mind, what you essentially can't think objectively. You have to think within the confines of your worldview. You cannot go beyond it. You cannot set your worldview aside and think as somebody else would think, like step into their shoes. So I think that, I mean, I'm pretty sure that would be why they wouldn't do a Bible study with you.
Well, see, but to me, in the same way that when I speak to a lot of people, I know that I'm not going to reach them. I know that when I debate, if I'm trying to change that person, especially the methodology I use is completely ineffective. I need to change and go more to what's called a street epistemology type approach. If I'm looking to quote unquote, affect that individual. When I'm trying to affect myself, when I'm actually looking for truth myself, I've got to take a completely different approach. Mm-hmm. And I also at least assume that these conversations that I have help other people that are on the fence to kind of give them a discussion to make them think. I mean, I'm not trying to change anybody's mind, but I do want to give them food for thought. So in the same way, if you're a presup and you want to change somebody's mind, or you want to give them the reason to maybe start thinking in a way that you would like them to think, then you need to be able to bring real arguments. You need to be able to show why I believe this. Now, that falls back into the Calvinist perspective of you got, Tulip and the non-elect versus the elect, and it's not their job to save anybody. They can't do that, which, again, that's when I fall back and go, then why are you doing anything? What's the point of you talking at all? Which I've yet to hear a good reason for that other than the Bible tells us to do so.
Yeah, I mean, that would be one response, like that the Bible tells you to. Another might be that God kind of cooperates with man and uses human mechanisms to draw people to himself. Even if it's all by his grace, he will use different mechanisms. So it'd be kind of a distinction between levels of causality, but that's kind of a sidebar. So yeah, something I was thinking about about the whole Bible study thing is that I think they should be willing to do it because they should be trying to reach the people who are listening to the discussion. Like if you're having a debate with a presuppositionalist, they might not be able to change your mind and you won't be able to change theirs, but you should be thinking of the people who are in the audience, the people who are listening, and who, like you said, who might be on the fence. So yeah, I think we're generally in agreement about that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean,
one thing when you
go ahead. MK.
I was going to say one thing about when you're arguing with a presuppositionalist. It's difficult when you're arguing about, let's say, the existence of God, and then the party who you're arguing against only assumes that God exists and will not go through any hypothetical where God does not exist to see if this thing works out. It's difficult if someone says, the Bible is true, and the thing that we're arguing is the Bible true, and then one person just says, I'm going to assume the Bible is true, and I'm not going to let go of that assumption no matter what. So it's a little dishonesty and the way they even approach the argument at the beginning. And they call it, you can't give neutral ground, but I don't believe it's giving neutral ground. I think it's just stepping into the other shoes and trying to understand the argument from both sides.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I don't really see anything wrong with neutral ground. I think these hypotheticals are pretty useful because they show whether a worldview has merit. So because you can show different modalities and possibilities. So if, for example, if you put the Christian worldview in a certain situation, like would it hold up, or any proposition really, if you put any proposition in different circumstances, you can use those circumstances to assess whether it would hold up. And sometimes with things like the law of identity, you'd be able to show that a proposition is false just based on these other circumstances. So yeah, I agree completely that you need to be able to think about hypotheticals, even if those hypotheticals aren't what you already believe. So
go ahead. I'm sorry. I was just going to say I couldn't agree more, because that's the whole point of me doing what I do. I think most people understand that, you know, I'm not necessarily here to break anybody's religion. I'm here to break my own, if you want to be honest with me. So.
You sound like a Puritan who would say that he's not only preaching to his audience but also to himself. So you've got kind of a Puritan mindset. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind taking on that moniker. That is fairly descriptive.
That would actually be a pretty clever name for a website or a brand, like the Atheist Puritan.
Exactly. Yeah. If I didn't have Ned or negation tied so much to me, I may change over to that, because I do like that little twist. That's pretty funny.
Yeah. Okay. So what about this idea that atheists already know that God exists? Carrie, do you know that God exists?
Sorry, say again?
Do you already know that God exists? Because presuppositionalists will say that you do.
No.
No?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
How do you react? I don't know if you've had many conversations with presuppositionalists, but how do you react when somebody tells you you already believe in God?
I understand where they're coming from, because it was part of my ministry to preach that sort of thing. At the very least, the idea that God had written his laws on your heart, and so every man had some facet of knowing God about him. But theology, in most regards, is a house of cards. You find that every point has to balance on something else, and if you pull out the fundamental card, it all collapses. It doesn't stand up under its own weight if you can start pulling out individual supports for the structure of a theological argument. So that's how it was for me. It didn't, and at that point, it didn't matter if there were 1,000 explanations for 1,001 questions. One of them fell apart, and that means everything else now has to be questioned.
Yeah, I wouldn't view, I've never viewed theology like that, like a house of cards. I viewed it more as like a spider's web, where, you know, you have some on the end that you can pick off, and then the spider's web will remain intact. But then there are a few at the core, which if you really get in there and pull on those, then the whole thing, you'll destroy it. But
yeah, that's what I'm talking about, the core. The idea that I've understand as well that some people don't take the fundamentalist evangelical route and are therefore a little more laid back in their biblical interpretations. But I was a hardcore fundy evangelical minister. So it was not only my job to preach the Great Commission, like go therefore and preach to all the peoples of the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. That was the Great Commission, my preaching work. There was also a matter of going to people of other faiths and explaining to them why their faith was wrong. So
Carrie, can I ask you a question, Carrie?
Sure.
What led you away? Because it sounds like you were someone who was very well informed about the faith. What led you away from the faith?
The fundamental tenets of God's nature, as described, are that he has 4 cardinal attributes: love, justice, wisdom, and power. And that if you were to do any kind of apologetics for examining the scriptures, you take a look at an example of him using his power. You're supposed to ask yourself, was it a wise use of power? And then is his wisdom based off of his sense of justice? And then was that sense of justice empowered by his love? And the fundamental point was God is love. And that was the pivotal key point that it was all structured on. So when you start walking through the discussion, you realize there are some actions that cannot be explained as loving. And that immediately starts breaking apart the entire web, because there are certain key points that are fundamental to building this lattice work of understanding. You can have doubts, fears, you name it, but as long as you're willing to wait on God's Spirit to explain them to you in a humble manner, you can be a skeptic and still be a theist. You just have to acknowledge that in some way you're supposed to be a humble servant of God, waiting for the answer to eventually come to you.
I have a problem with that due to the fact that our love comes from our endorphins. It comes from chemicals within our brain. For an omnipotent God would not experience the same type of love we do. That he would not experience the same type of emotional pain we do.
Sure.
For him, would it be more critical, as in thinking of everything as in black and white? So they are doing negative, they must receive a negative punishment. They are doing positive, they must be rewarded.
And immediately there, any attempt to compare our nature to God's nature would have seemed completely specious. Just don't try it, because it wouldn't have made any difference to an evangelical. You're a flawed, imperfect being who can't understand God's nature. All you can do is accept the literal word of the Bible, that it is inspired by God and beneficial. So, like all word is God breathed, as it's said in many.
Carrie,
so it becomes a matter of literal interpretation.
Yeah, Carrie, I'm a little curious about something. So you say you were in the super fundamentalist background and you viewed it like a house of cards. So I'm wondering, do you think if you were in like a different Christian tradition that you would have fallen away, or you would have because, you know, you had problems with really the core teachings?
That's a difficult question, given what I've learned now that I'm out, because I've met many Christians. I've met people who call themselves Christian atheists. So it's a bit interesting for me. I'm not certain how it would have worked. It's to each his own, I suppose. I'm a member of the Clergy Project, and we talk, and that's an organization of currently practicing ministers, priests, bishops, you name it, who are all in the pulpit preaching congregations, but they know they're atheists and they don't know how to get out of it. Mm-hmm. So we basically have a support group for each other, in which we're talking about those of us who have actually deconverted, who have gotten away from our ministries, how we did it, and that helps them walk them through their own personal journey, because each and every one of them, it's a personal thing. Each and every one of them has their own structure as to why it's the truth to them or why they are a believer. And so it has to be on their own terms that they leave. It can't be something that you can be reasoned out of that way, because it is a coherent web for them. And they have to reason themselves out of it, because they did actually reason themselves into it. It's just, it's very internally consistent structure. So it's a personal thing and they have to do it themselves.
I was actually going to ask you about that, because it does seem like it'd be a really difficult thing. Like if, like, say you went to a seminary for theology or something like that, and then you've worked at a church for 15 years, you lost your faith, and then it's like, well, ministry is the only thing you know, and the only thing you know how to do, so you're not qualified to do anything else. So,
well, to a certain point, that is some of the problems that people find, because you are talking about people who were probably born into their specific faith, and they have gone to seminary, whatever kind of ordination they went through. They are perhaps living on church grounds in a house or apartment granted by the church. They're paid by the church. It's their career. That's all they've got. But there are many facets to running a congregation. Often it's useful for people to get involved in different kinds of social work after they're done, because you're used to dealing with people sort of on the confessional level, or you're used to dealing with the community at large, organizing events. So a lot of people just need to have a certain skills assessment done to help them realize that all of these skills that they've been using in their ministry can be applied in other areas. They just need to think of it that way. And all of a sudden the options open up before them.
Yeah. Were you a KJV onlyist?
No, but we were very respectful, I suppose is the right word, of the King James Version. A lot of what it comes down to is, it depends on which version of the Bible you pick as to how your arguments are shaped, but not necessarily the substance of them.
Mm-hmm. All right. I kind of want to get back to Van Tilian, to Van Tilianism. I do have an argument that I'd like to run by you guys against Van Tilianism, and I'm kind of basing this on something that Doug Wilson said. I'm sure you guys have heard this quote before in this argument, and so I guess what I'm doing is kind of turning it around and flipping it against presuppositionalism. Doug Wilson said, if there is no God, then all that exists is time and chance acting in matter. If this is true, then the difference between your thoughts and mine corresponds to the difference between shaking up a bottle of Mountain Dew and a bottle of Dr. Pepper. You fizz atheistically and I fizz theistically. I think in a sense, presuppositionalism, at least in the Van Tilian sense, could be theistic fizz. Because, okay, you have this idea that God, the existence of God, is implanted knowledge in your mind, and implanted knowledge isn't something that's grounded, like grounded in anything rational. Like John Calvin wrote in chapter 3 of the Institutes, a sense of the deity is indelibly engraven on the human heart. And we see the same sort of thing in K. Scott Oliphant's book, Reasons for Faith, where the existence of God is. Let me see if I can get the exact quote. Anyway, so the existence of God isn't grounded rationally. It's there because it's there. God has implanted it. But the thing is, if you have an implanted belief, then it's not necessarily like a rational belief. So think for example of the difference between cause and effect and grounds and consequent. A cause and effect.
Hold on, what?
Yeah.
I just want to ask, why wouldn't it be rational? Why wouldn't an implanted belief be rational?
Okay. I'm explaining it now. So it's the difference between cause and effect and grounds and consequent. Cause and effect would be something like he's sick, therefore he's in bed all day, while grounds and the consequent would be something like he stayed in bed late, so he must be sick. So his late rising isn't the cause of his illness, but it's the cause of the belief that he's ill. So the grounds and the consequent will be the set of reasons for the belief. Think of the example of somebody who is locked in a mental institution because he believes that he's the Messiah or something like that. He has a cause for his belief, but he doesn't have any grounds for his belief. And so with this idea that knowledge of God is implanted in your mind, you have cause, but you don't have grounds. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, it definitely makes sense.
Ned, what do you think? Make sense?
Yeah. What would be interesting to see is how they would react, because I mean, the way that my interactions have been, they would, I think, champion that view. They wouldn't have a problem with it whatsoever. I mean, being such hard determinists, I don't think they'd have a problem with it whatsoever. In fact, I think that what you would have a problem when you posit that to them is getting them to see that that is problematic in any way. They would say, what's the problem there?
Yeah. Okay.
It would be the virtuous circle. That's what they call it, the virtuous circle.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. Exactly. That's right, MP. That's what they would quote there.
Yeah. I just found the word that I was looking for when I couldn't find it. Scott Oliphant described as non-ratio sinative. I think that's how it's pronounced. And I also quoted John Calvin. So I think presuppositionalists would affirm this idea that knowledge is implanted, but I don't know how you get around the problem of not having a grounds for that belief. Like you have the cause, but no grounds.
But I don't think they want or care about having that. They want to have quote unquote justification for their belief, not necessarily a grounding in rationality. Mm-hmm. All they want to do is just have basically, where do my beliefs come from? God, good, boom, end of discussion. I don't need any more.
But they would also attack that. They would also then allow this whole. They would say, well, I know God exists because the Bible says He exists. Number one, and look at everything around. Everything's been created. This is all evidence that God actually exists. So that's.
Sorry, I don't think a presuppositionalist would argue like that. I mean, they do say that they'll use evidences sometimes, but chiefly they don't use that kind of argument. The whole thing is that you have to start with the Christian worldview, and based on that, then you can interpret the world around you. But I don't think they would say, look at the world around you, therefore God. They say God, therefore you can rationally interpret the world around you. So I don't think they would use that.
No, they would call it special revelation, I think.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. That's exactly what they do.
Yeah, that's what they call it. But I don't think I haven't met a presupper that said that doesn't deny that the argument is circular in nature. They just call it virtuously circular, which is special pleading because they're saying all of the circular arguments are false except for this one. But in that sense, do you guys ever try to, when you're arguing a presup, do you guys ever attack this virtuous circularity that they posit?
No, I don't, because I think that just gets too convoluted, and I think there are better ways to approach it. So yeah, the whole issue with virtuous circularity is that they believe that they have an inlet for their knowledge, which is God, whereas so they can get out of hard solipsism, whereas the atheist doesn't have that sort of inlet. He's just kind of stuck in the circle. But the presuppositionalists almost have a funnel for the circle that's sending down knowledge, basically.
And all I do is I change the funnel. What I do is instead of attribute it to a God, I kind of do the same thing I did with Hovind at the end there, is say, okay, I believe that we live in a computer construct. Namely, we're no more than Sims, and everything that we think is real is computer code. So, and that is my virtuous circle because it feeds back on itself, and everything we look follows the code. The code is perfect. It's exactly what we'd expect to see. How do you explain? And then you can get into all the, really kind of what I consider to be funny arguments of, like in the Matrix, whenever you see deja vu. See, that's a skip in the code. We know that. Yeah, see how it feeds on itself. It's exactly perfect, which drives them nuts.
That would drive me nuts if I was a precept too.
Yeah, that was I did enjoy listening to that argument, the whole Matrix thing. That was funny.
Thank you. I mean, I'd like to say it's mine. It's not. I definitely piggyback on a ton of other people there. So
yeah, I'm pretty sure I've heard it before, but yeah, it's still. But I didn't expect it in this debate because it wasn't like a pre-sup debate. So.
Well, I had pre-planned that, to be honest with you, because I know that Kent usually ends with, "If you want to believe that, I feel sorry, and I'll feel sorry for you when you're burning in hell." So I'm like, okay, well, I'll feel.
Oh man, I was hoping that this would be a Kent Hovind free discussion, but
sorry, that's totally my fault. I'll withdraw that. We'll just move on.
No, it's all right. Well, I did have another comment about Kent Hovind now. That's one of the funny things about debating him. He's been doing it so long that you know everything he's going to say, and every time he has like a clever line, you can always prepare for it because he's done those same clever lines 1,000 times before.
And the other
he hasn't changed his script at all. Not in 20 years. It's the same fucking script.
But what's amazing is there was enough, especially with that debate we had. All he would have had to do is go to my channel and watch literally 6 minutes worth of video, and he would have known my entire argument. Mm-hmm. And I'm shocked that he wouldn't. I mean, we've had almost a month to plan for this, and not a, I mean, to me, the main reason I really felt that he didn't know it was because of the quote-unquote thought experiments that I set up in the beginning. Those were almost verbatim off of those 2-3 minute videos. I would have, and that was one of the reasons that I kept going and didn't ask him. I did both thought experiments back to back instead of what I usually do is do one, ask questions, then follow up with the second one. But I was so sure that he had at least done a little bit of prep work that I wanted to get both of those out there and kind of try to piggyback between them. But it was clear he had no idea at all, which is just shocking.
Yeah, I actually did get the sense that when I set up a debate between Kent Hovind and my friend Zach about a theistic evolution, and I had the sense that I think Kent Hovind might have actually said, like asked, "This is theistic evolution" or something like that, like right before the debate. So I don't know. I think he just like switches between different scripts depending on the topic. So like if it's atheistic evolution, he'll say one thing, but we were talking more about the Bible, so he'll say something else. So yeah, your debate was interesting because it was about a topic that I'd never seen him debate before. So I wouldn't know if there would even be a script for that.
There was, from what my research, I found there's a couple of in his his video, or the videos that he sells. There was one, I believe it was number 5 on evolution, and I think it's titled, it's probably not this, but something to the point, something to the effect of the ramifications of atheism, the results of the atheism or atheistic evolution. And that's where he got into a lot of the Hitler deal, and that's why I was so prepared from the Hitler, because I figured he was going to go down that route. But other than that, you're right. He really hasn't. And to be honest, when Steve asked me if I would be willing to do it, I said the same thing. I said, absolutely, I'll talk to him, but I don't think he's gonna want to come to the table just because it's not his strong suit.
Yeah. Yeah, during the debate when he brought up Hitler, I remember typing in Godwin's Law into the live chat.
There you go, exactly. Every time, and every time morality comes up, almost, you will, I mean, that law is flawless. Every time Godwin's going to come up. So.
Yeah, I mean, it does come up a lot, especially during moral argument discussions, because Hitler would be like the main extreme example that you can think of. But yeah.
But Hitler wasn't even an atheist, though. That's the problem. I don't know why you keep bringing him up, because Hitler was not an atheist.
And
I didn't mean in that sense. I mean like extreme moral obscenity that you could go to. Like he's the first one that comes to mind.
Right. And the other end of it is he's not evolutionist either. He completely believed that the Aryan race was divinely created.
Oh yeah, you said that you've done research on Hitler or something, right?
Yeah, and I specifically did it because of this debate. And when I found that video of him being so, I guess dependent, for lack of a better term, on Hitler and using Hitler as an example of what happens when you go to a secular type government. And so, and some of the stuff I found was amazing, especially like the Martin Luther stuff, how influential Martin Luther was to Hitler, especially when Hitler was about 13 or 14, he fell into a lake and almost drowned. And a priest is the one who saved him. And from that time until his late teens, he literally wanted to be a priest. And Martin Luther, if you look at Martin Luther and his book, The Lies of Jews, what Martin Luther prescribed to do to the Jews, short of gassing them and killing them, is almost, I guess, I mean, it mirrors the Nazi methodology so closely that there's literally historians out there that say Hitler used that as his template for creating.
Yeah, I haven't read the Jews and Their Lies, but I have read some other stuff by Luther, and I can say he has a lot of inflamed rhetoric. So I don't know if how seriously I would take him, or if I would really think that he was advocating for torturing people, but I don't know.
Well, it's a bit of a fine point, I suppose, but Hitchens mentioned a long time ago in one of his debates about the fact that the Catholic Church hadn't actually rescinded the charge of deicide against the entire Jewish race until 1964, I think it was. So you're talking a couple thousand years of where everyone thought the Jews should be charged and were guilty of a crime. And that's got to affect bigotry and prejudice.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Rescinding it, I think it could just be that, I don't know, they didn't feel like they were guilty of it or something. It might not be that they thought that the Jews were evil or anything like that. But I
don't know. But the damage was done. I mean, the First World War, the Second World War, 1960. That's a long time.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and I guess you would think that after that, like after World War II, and the world sees the atrocities and everything, the Catholic Church would feel compelled to say, like, we condemn this in the strongest terms or something like that. But I don't know much about the history surrounding that. Like, I don't know what kind of statements they made.
Well, I don't know if it was back at me, but as far as the Catholic Church goes, from what I can tell, I don't know if I would say support or supported Hitler was the right word, but they definitely didn't condemn what he was doing in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah,
they did support him. The first contract or treaty that Hitler ever made was with the Catholic Church. The Concordant was signed so that the Catholic Church would take over the education system in Germany.
Yeah, but what year was that? Because that could have been before Hitler showed how awful he was.
Right, and that was kind of my point, is that, you know, if it was early when I guess they got in bed with him, so to speak, and those treaties and those contracts were signed, that might be somewhat understandable. But like the main thing that makes me really, I guess, gives me problem with the Catholic Church on that end is that all the way through, even when I would arguably say they knew what was happening as far as the genocide toward the Jews, they didn't act negatively toward him at all. They didn't condemn him. They didn't come out publicly. The Pope didn't say anything. I mean, it was nothing. And I guess the other interesting thing, this is completely a different topic, but the other interesting thing that I found that I was surprised to find is that there's actually some drawings out there as far as what Hitler viewed the evolution, quote unquote, of man. And he's got 3 different, I guess, beginnings of genealogy that God created all the different races by themselves. And so you've got a straight line coming up, of course, from God to the Aryans. And then the rest of them ends up being mixed. And every time, and that was his biggest problem, that any time that a Jewish or a non-Aryan would mix with an Aryan, it would forever condemn that bloodline, make that bloodline impure. So, and in the same way that, like I said during the debate, in the same way that the Nephilim were, quote unquote, I don't know how to say it other than poisoning humanity's bloodline, and that was one of the reasons for the Noatic flood, Hitler thought the same way, that we've got to get rid of these people because they are harming the God's chosen people, which of course he thought he was part of in the Aryan bloodline. So, like I told Kent, he needs to be careful because in reality he has far more in common with Hitler than most atheists, at least.
Did you go through all this in the debate? I don't remember that.
I didn't get to all of that because it never came up. I mean, if he would have specifically, all I told him was a couple of times. Well, the first time I told him, look, Kent, you need to be very careful. And if you want to come back and have a full debate on Hitler, I am more than willing to go down that road. But you need to understand, you know, I think I touched on the divinity of at least in Hitler's opinion, of the Aryan race. I think I may have said something about the Noah's flood and how, you know, that was one of the justifications that Hitler, at least from what I could tell, used. But that was about it because we moved on pretty quickly, which again was kind of telling because I think he started to understand, you know what, maybe I don't remember this as well as I thought I did. And in the other reason that I brought up Mein Kampf, and I had to read it, which before this debate, because I want to make sure I could talk, which it's an interesting read, man. I got to tell you, you watch, at least from my perspective, you can almost see him going crazy. You can see how infuriated, I mean, how he starts fairly benign at the beginning of the book, talking about, you know, government and whatever. And by the end, he sounds, for lack of better terms, like Alice Jones, just nuts, trying to, you know, everything's, you know.
That's really interesting because I haven't read the entire book, but I know I've read like the first chapter or something, and I remember thinking this is really interesting because it looks like just a scholarly piece of work.
Oh yeah, and it does. Like I said, it starts off fairly benign, and he makes some good points, and you're like, wow, this isn't bad. And then about the last 2 or so sections, you're like, okay, this guy's lost it. He's
Yeah.
So yeah.
Hey, quick point. I wanted to ask about the Catholic Church, and them with the Nazis. Would you like? I've always understood it that the Catholic Church kind of almost had very little choice being in Rome, and Mussolini, the Italians, actually being an ally of the Nazis back in World War II. So it put the Catholic Church in a precarious position, being in Italy, in the middle of Italy, with the ally of the Nazis. You know, I don't think it wouldn't have been feasible for them to then come out and denounce the Nazis, because they have no army, they have no military strength, and they're in the middle of World War II.
But MP, wait a second. I mean, again, do they or do not they not believe that they literally have the most powerful entity in all creation on their side? If they do, there should be no fear about what man can do to them. That doesn't follow.
Of course, but it shows you. I think it also exposes what you're saying right now. But there's also a pragmatic piece of it that I think we'd also have to consider. You have the city of the Vatican City in the middle of a more or less hostile country, and that's taken over most of Europe. It wouldn't have been feasible, I think, for the Pope or the Catholic Church to come out against the Nazis or even Mussolini because of where they were situated at.
I don't either.
I don't think it's a fair assessment to say that anyone in Italy would have viewed the Vatican as a hostile in any facet. I mean, literally, if the Pope had told Mussolini to change his mind, he would have almost been honor bound to do it. That's how much reverence they hold for that. And the concordance that they signed with various countries around the earth, this was standard practice for them. It wasn't anything exceptional. There were pre-existing concordants signed like with Bulgaria and at those places. So it was only natural that they would sign one with Germany. It's the fact that they did it and then to this day haven't rescinded it is kind of telling.
I agree with Kerry. It's extremely telling. I mean, and using the pragmatist approach and saying, well, look, they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. Well, you're only stuck between a rock and a hard place if you're not an anvil. I mean, the whole point is they should be, if they're correct, literally untouchable. No one is going to be able to work against the Pope. No one is going to be able to work against Vatican City if it is under God's protection. And I have no idea how a Catholic could argue that somehow the Vatican and the Pope would not have been under God's protection during World War II.
Yeah, I mean, without like the theological part, like I can understand from a human perspective, like people are caught in these really difficult political, moral dilemmas. Like it's not only the Vatican, like you've seen that kind of thing throughout history where governmental entities or individuals would make terrible mistakes because they feared for their lives or their future or something like that. So that's definitely not a justification. Like that doesn't make it the right thing to do, but I can still understand from like a human perspective why they would have made those decisions.
And Richard, that actually to me is, I guess, demonstrating that as much as they want to profess that they have absolute faith and absolute certainty in this God's existence, their actions do not reflect that sincere faith, that bulletproof belief system. In fact, I've got one of my first videos I did on that is no one believes in God, which I take a different approach. But in essence, I'm saying the same thing, is that if you honestly believed in God, your actions would be far different than what you do every day. And again, that's reflective of that, because you're right. From just a person who feels that there is no supernatural. Their actions make absolute sense. They're trying to protect themselves and not, literally come under fire, which that's great. But when you start throwing the protection of an omnipotent being, an omnipotent being, it completely goes out the window. It makes no sense.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. People often have like conflicting beliefs, and their actions conflict with their beliefs. Like, while you might believe in God, you're still fearing for your life. Even like you do the wrong thing, even though you know you shouldn't. So I think we do the same kind of thing in ethical decisions all the time. Like, but that wouldn't mean, for example, that you don't believe in the difference between right and wrong just because you make the wrong decision. I don't know if there would be an analogy there, but.
Well, okay, and I mean, I don't want to get into the argument too much, but there are certain things that we don't do, and we're flawless. And in fact, I bring that up in the argument is that, let's not pretend that we are not perfect in certain actions, because we are. There are certain things that I would say a normal human being cannot do in the presence of someone that they respect and they love, if that person that they're aware of knows what they're doing. So, but they can always do it in front of God. But at the same time, they believe that God is omnipotent, so He knows what you're doing. But and coupled with that fact is that, from what I understand, most believers look at the relationship they have between themselves and their deity as the most important, and they respect that God more than anybody. So how can you take, when you have a group of individuals that are, for any measure, they're a lesser being or whatever, their relationship should be lesser on the scale, and they physically cannot perform certain actions in front of them, but they can do those same actions in front of an entity that they reportedly respect and care more about that relationship. Again, it doesn't follow.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I think a big part of it could be that we believe that God is invisible. So if God were, like, if you could physically see God, then that might change your behavior. Like, with other people who you respect, you can see them. So
not necessarily, because if you've got a closed circuit, let's say that you've got a closed circuit TV or a closed circuit camera feeding into a room.
Yeah, okay, I get what you're saying.
And you don't know when or if your mother, your father, whoever you respect the most, or whoever is watching on the other end, but you know that it's possible that they're watching. Again, I would argue you couldn't perform certain tasks.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
If I can, I wanted to ask you guys a question. We're talking about presuppositionalism. I was speaking to a presup who was fairly knowledgeable, and he brought up the fact, he was like, and he was breaking down the argument, and he said, on his perspective, they're making the assumption that God exists. It's their ultimate basal assumption. God exists, and therefore it grounds them, and they can make all the other assumptions, uniformity of nature, laws of logic, whatever you want to call them. But then when you ask for justification on whether that God exists, their response is, okay, well, if we basic beliefs all the way down to their basal assumptions, then what justification do you have for those? And then we'll say, well, we don't have justifications for those. We have to just kind of, we assume them kind of in this utilitarian way. And then the response is, well, if you can assume your basal assumptions, why can't I assume my basal assumption, which is God? So how would you guys respond to that? Because that seems to be the way I think Dawkins puts it out. And Matt Slick, actually, I was in a hangout with Matt Slick, and he kind of put it forth that way.
So I think, I guess if I were responding like an atheist, I might say something like your basal assumptions are necessary in that you need them to function in your daily life, whereas the atheist wouldn't view God as something that's necessary in that same way. Did I get that right?
That's essentially it. It's a +1 argument. So you've got a working structure, and then for some reason you tack on God as an additional entity into the equation. And so, like Occam's razor said, unless you have to show there's a reason for adding entities to the argument. What's the reason why he has to be there if both systems work?
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's why evidential apologetics would be more useful than presuppositionalism, because then at least if the argument is successful, then you would be able to show that.
To kind of follow up on what MP was saying, they will say they will want the atheists to justify their Basal assumptions, which is kind of ridiculous because there's no way you can't justify your starting point. You can't go pre-starting point to try and justify your starting point. But then when, at least from what I've seen with Darth and Matt Slick, if you can try and flip it on them, well, if you want me to justify my Basal assumptions, I want you to justify your God without using your God. And I don't know, it just kind of breaks down from there.
Yeah, so yeah. I think what they would say about that is that your starting point isn't sufficient. So they would be calling you to analyze that and try to show you that you need a different starting point, namely God.
But the reason they're saying that it's not sufficient is because they're trying to make claims to absolutes, and they're not actually able to demonstrate these absolutes. They're just claiming that they can provide absolutes, even though all you need is a reliable system and you're good to go.
Or they claim. Sorry, go ahead.
They claim they can basically, the way I see it, they claim they can justify their assumptions or they can justify their presuppositions, but an atheist can't.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, they can't justify the ultimate one, which is God. And the way I usually attack it is that I would say, if not to just, I would ask them, how can I understand this God without using the Basal assumptions? Because if they're saying the Basal assumptions, God is a cause of the Basal assumptions, then there should be some meaningful way that I can understand the God concept without appealing to the Basal assumptions. But to even understand it, I have to appeal to the Basal assumptions. So it's kind of, it's that, which came first, the chicken or the egg?
Yes, that's a good point, MP.
Or work backwards. And what I mean by that is say, okay, let's throw away all of the Basal assumptions and just go with I guess the only thing that we can agree on is that we both exist independently. In other words, I don't know that you exist, you don't know that I exist. But you do know that you're experiencing something somehow and you exist. Now let's bridge that gap and let's start trying to justify any Basal assumption. Well, it all falls apart. Even God. You cannot ever, again, the problem of hard solipsism, you cannot get past that dam. That barrier is, at least in my opinion, from what I've seen, insurmountable. Even with God. You can assert God, but you cannot in any way, shape, or form justify that God, because the only way that you are going to know about that God is through your senses, through divine revelation, through an outside source interacting with you in some way, shape, or form. Once you get that, all bets are off. Anything can be an illusion at that point. So we're in the same boat.
Yeah.
Let me pop in here with an observation that the primary problem with all presuppositionism and the religious arguments in general is they only allow their side to play. The moment you have other people with their assumptions, with their religious assumptions, let alone atheists, forget atheists, we're a minor player on the field, then you now have a grave difficulty. Another thing that you need to distinguish is between fundamental assumptions that relate to decidable propositions that science can deal with and the ones that deal with undecidable, normative, ethical things, where everybody not only is entitled to their assumptions, but has to make assumptions because it's not something that can be empirically determined. You have to base your belief system on it. The edge that you can come in is it probable that a religion that makes false claims about decidable propositions is equally okay to still have its turf for its undecidable propositions one? And the Bible skates into that territory. Most of the major religions skate into that territory because they have examples in their baggage of things where they make empirical statements about the world that aren't true.
Yeah, James. So what I think the presuppositionalist will respond to this, and we kind of went over this a little earlier. They'll respond to this by going back to the whole starting point thing. So the reason that you would think that it has a false decidable proposition, so the argument goes, is that you are starting from an atheistic perspective and interpreting these things within the context of your worldview. But if you were to start from their perspective, then you would interpret it within the context of their worldview, and therefore you wouldn't see a problem there. So that would be their response.
Yeah, that means, and in there, all you have to do is to have in the same room you, Ross, and Kent Hovind, and a flat earther, and Malcolm Bowden, the geocentrist, and say, have at it. You tell me on the basis of scripture, the shape of the earth, does it revolve around the sun, and the age of the earth? And when you kids can work out an absolutely clear position based on scripture that all of you can agree with, then you can come back and tell me that you don't have some internal problems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, would disagreements necessarily characterize internal problems though? Like you have atheists who disagree about
fundamental. The notion of whether the earth revolves around the sun or vice versa, whether it's flat as a pancake or a sphere, is kind of a big deal. Whether it's got a lot of zeros.
Yeah, not in a theological perspective, because the Bible isn't trying to answer those questions. So I don't think that would be important.
Well, but remember the point I'm making is, can the Bible be deemed theologically plausible if it is making empirically false statements that we can decide not to be so? And you find double standards play here all the time. I remember when Mortimer Adler, and it may be too young to remember Mortimer Adler, he was a conservative philosopher, kind of self-taught, brilliant as a whip. He was involved in the Great Book series back in the 60s and 70s and so on, and died, I think, only a few years ago. At any rate, Adler would be a literalist for everybody's religion but Christianity. Suddenly he would be a metaphorist, and he would rationalize away the oddball bits about the age of the earth. But boy, he demanded that you take the damn Mahabharata straight up, because it talks about all these giant battles that never took place. And I'm going, double standard, double standard. And so if you want to pick a standard, fine, but everybody gets to play.
Yeah.
If you let that thing go, you're pretty soon going to have people on the playing field that give you steam out of your ears.
Yeah, I definitely have seen that before, where you hold your position to a lower standard than somebody else's. Like let's just take, because we're already talking about this, Christian and the Muslim arguing. The Christian will have a lower standard for the Bible than they have for the Quran. Like they'll take something that looks like a contradiction and say, no, you have to look at the context. But then at the same time, on the other side of their mouth, they'll go to the Quran and just quote mine things and just be like, look, contradiction.
That's why it's fun to look at other people's religions.
Yeah.
And to springboard on what James is saying a little bit, I mean, you don't even need to have those other people in the room, in my opinion. I mean, all you need, in fact, you don't have to get off the first page of the Bible. Go to Genesis 1:16, where it clearly says that God created two lights, one to rule the day and one to rule the night. That is demonstrably wrong. There are not two lights. There are one, by any and all definitions. And even if you want to say, well, they didn't understand reflectivity. No, all you have to do is go to Exodus, where God is telling Moses how to build the temple, the temple for the Ark of the Covenant, and he specifically is talking about melting down the bronze mirrors. So there's not a problem here where they don't understand reflectivity. There's not a problem that there's not even a word for reflectivity, because there's plenty in the Bible. That passage specifically shows that the people of at that time did not understand that, for lack of a better term, a big rock floating in the sky would have enough, or the sun would be bright enough that reflected light would show up as a light source.
But Hugh Ross has a response to that, and it shows the apologetic inerrantist mind at work, because he would say, oh, no, this is actually a reference to the opacity of the early atmosphere of the earth 4 billion years ago. And your mouth has just jaw dropped at that point. But it means that no matter, if you have an inerrantist mind, and that's fundamentally what we're dealing with here, is have essentially a book that is believed to be revealed truth, and which in all of the really important matters must be true. If you have a mind that is basically willing to accept that, it has infinite elasticity, in figuring out how to shuffleboard around internal contradictions and minor fiddly bits. And you can have a different set of rationalizations, but I would contend Kent Hovind rationalizes the Bible no more or less than you, Ross. They just differ about what parts they feel like flushing down the toilet.
And I agree with that. And that's why I said, if you're set up in that type of room, absolutely. You know, throw the bone on the floor and let them fight over it. That would be hilarious to watch, number one. And number two, prove your point 10 times over. But if you don't happen to have that type of setup, then you can go in and start picking apart things that, like you said, and you know, I mentioned in that debate about morality, but it's the same thing with science. If we've got to reveal truth from an omnipotent being, we should see everything in the Bible maintain its, I guess, validity throughout time. There should never be a change. We shouldn't need to interpret. Whereas
God needed a much better stenographer.
Exactly. And the thing is again, you've got to argue that God, being all-powerful and omnipotent, he knew how the Bible was going to look now with its hundreds of different versions.
Yeah.
And
put in your 2 cents worth.
Hey, Zach, how's it going? Is your connection better?
Yeah, it's good now.
Yeah, we're talking about presup.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I know you just jumped in, so you're probably not sure where we are, but
yeah, I have no idea.
Hashing the things that will never be resolved by human minds.
I see.
Yeah, like for example, they brought up how in Genesis 1:16, the text says that there is a greater light and a lesser light to rule the sky, and that's a clearly demonstrable falsehood coming from the Bible. And so you would use that kind of against presuppositionalism. So that's kind of where we are. We're kind of going over that.
Yeah, that's a terrible argument. But
go on.
Yes, please do.
Oh yeah, I mean that's just flat out a horrible argument. That has nothing to do with presuppositionalism, and there are much better arguments.
Well, that was just kind of a broad strokes. Like I was just summarizing his argument as broadly as I could. But do you like let's say as a contradiction in the Bible, a contradiction with the real world as we know it, would you say that that is a bad argument, or is that not what you meant?
Well, I mean, there's nothing good about that argument, but it's especially bad if you're trying to use it against presuppositionalism.
Okay, how would you understand Genesis 1:16 then?
Yeah, okay, so it seems to me pretty simple. If you are trying to communicate to a people that don't understand what a reflective surface is, and they don't understand the composition of the moon, but they do see that there are two what appear to be light sources in the sky, of course you would refer to them as greater and lesser lights. The sun is really, really bright. The moon does not appear so bright. So I don't really see what the problem is with that.
So yeah, like you
would you like me to come back on that? Or?
Yeah, Ned.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, sure, go ahead.
Okay, so what you're arguing is that they didn't have any idea what reflectivity was in the Bible, correct?
No, not at all.
Okay.
I'm saying that if you try to communicate to someone who doesn't know what the moon is made out of and couldn't possibly know what it's made out of, if you try to say, oh, actually, it's do what?
Why can't God just tell them?
Because it would, well, first, for two reasons. First, it would be pointless because it doesn't add anything at all to the passage to get a scientifically precise thing.
The handiwork.
Secondly, it wouldn't be coherent to them because it's talking about stuff that they wouldn't need. Like
why?
It doesn't really.
Wait, James. Let's stay with Scripture. Let's not talk about what God could have done or why He would have done it. Let's talk about what God did do, because that, I think, especially from the perspective of someone who believes the Bible's literal, that's going to have a lot more to do with. So again, I want to be clear on this, in that. I mean, I don't want to name drop unless you don't mind, so I'm not going to say the name I see on the screen as far as what's here, because I don't know if you want people to know your name or not. But Sombrero guy, I don't know what else to call you, but I don't mean it negative. Okay, yeah. Zachary, so I can use your name. Okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
All right. Okay, so Zachary, again, what I need to be clear on this is you're telling me that in the Pentateuch, at least, what Moses wrote, Moses did not know what how reflectivity, what he doesn't know what reflective properties are, correct?
No, not at all. I'm saying it's really simple. It's phenomenological language. Whenever you ask a child on the earth, whenever you look up in the sky, they're going to think that the moon and the sun are both light sources, because that's how it appears. Just like it appears that the sun rises, you know, just as, even though we know that that's actually a phenomenon of the earth rotating. So if you're just simply saying, here are the phenomena that are, or certain phenomena that are on earth, and we'll just refer to them as, say, sunrises and light sources, then you can communicate in that way. Just like you can tell a kid, hey, you know that white light in the sky? That's actually the moon. And you can refer to it that way in a coherent way. So the alternative would be that you would have to give a God would have to provide an entirely coherent scientific understanding of the universe to people that didn't even have the same framework that we have today post-Enlightenment. It's not. This has nothing to do with science. It's just,
James, let me finish with this real quick. Yeah. Okay, so Zach, what you're telling me, and I want to make sure I'm clear. I've got, you know, I would argue that I have a 5-year-old that I could take a mirror and show him how a mirror takes a light and reflects that light onto a different surface. And he would understand that I say, okay, the light we see from the moon is the same way that whenever we see the light source that shines on the mirror, it's reflected on the floor. Mm-hmm. So so what I'm trying to understand here is, are you saying that God couldn't have done that and those people couldn't understand what a 5-year-old today can understand?
No, I'm saying that in order to explain that, he would have to completely uproot the entire cosmology that was understood in the ancient Near East, completely start over, introduce completely brand new Copernican cosmology, and then explain to them how that works. The reflectivity of the moon only works if you understand that the sun is still more or less present at the same time at night. But if you have an Israelite cosmology, or really the cosmology of any culture in the ancient Near East, they don't view the sun and the moon the same way that we do, nor they view the earth the same way that we do.
Well, they were geocentrists, right? They were Earth was the center of the universe, and the sun.
No, it's not even that. It goes much further than that. They don't even view the motion of the planets and the motion of the stars the same way we do.
Which is exactly over millions of years, God never chit-chatted with anybody about what cosmology was until we get down to the texts that are written in the Old Testament.
Well, he couldn't have chatted with anyone for millions of years because human beings were the first ones to develop language about, I don't know, 100,000 years ago. So I don't know how, unless you're proposing he chat with the dinosaurs or something.
Problematic argument. Well, that are used in language, some of those, the Brokaw's area, and that trace all the way back to Homo habilis.
Well, fine, but the point is that humanity didn't exist millions and millions of years ago, only a couple 100,000 or so.
Let's not hair split again.
Okay.
Hey, Ned, I would actually
kind of went to the weeds.
Ned, I would actually like you to run by that timeless argument that you pitched at the beginning. I'd like you to run it again to see what Zach has to say, things about it. He might disagree with it, but
okay, that's fine.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly what it was, but I remember thinking that it was unique. So maybe you can just pitch it again.
Okay. The train's about to go by, guys. So if it gets loud, sorry.
Right.
I don't have much choice. I can't move. So one of the fundamental things that I run into when I talk with most precept people, specifically Cyclone versions or Sci-10's version. And again, I don't mean to offend at all, Zachary, sorry. That's just, I'm trying to let you know where I'm coming from. Is that one of the main tenets of that argument is that you can hold objective knowledge, absolute knowledge with 100% certainty, and an atheist like myself cannot. So if you hold that same type of belief that only with God can you get absolute knowledge, my argument is that in fact the opposite is true, in that with my abilities, there's only one thing. Well, there's a few things that I can know for certain with 100% certainty, but one of those is my own existence. With an omnigod, you can't even have that. If an omnigod exists, your own existence is not even certain. And the reason for that is, in the same way that an artist may use guidelines and then erase them later on because he doesn't need them anymore to complete the picture, God could erase people from humanity. And unlike an artist, where artists would work in a temporal sense, and so at one time those guidelines would have existed. Well, God is timeless. So when he would go back and erase, for lack of a better term, he could move before that person exists, erase that line, so to speak, and that line would have never existed, at least in the timeline that we're in. So the one thing that I can hold on to as absolute certainty, any person that believes in an omnigod loses that immediately with the existence of an omnigod. And that doesn't even start to touch on every other aspect of what we perceive to be as reality. Everything evaporates. Nothing is solid anymore because it is completely subjective to God's will, including your own existence.
So, okay, I had a little hard time following that, but if I understand it correctly, you're saying that if you have an omnigod that can act at all points in time, even if you currently believe that you do exist, he could go back in time and make you not exist? Is that more or less what you're arguing?
Is there anything that you feel would run contrary to that or make that untenable?
Well, I don't believe that God can change the past, because I don't think that the past exists anymore. But that's a different thing altogether. Otherwise, so I would agree with you. If you believe that it's coherent to change the past, then yeah, I suppose you could do that. I don't necessarily know that really. I don't know that really argues what you would want to conclude, though, because
so God is not all-knowing.
I didn't say that at all. That's
well,
ridiculous.
if in the past, if he's all-knowing, he could easily remove that person from the future.
What? In the what? No.
If he's all-knowing and he's knowing what's going to occur, at that time he can just kill that.
That's totally off the point.
Here's the gods are omnipotent and omniscient and eternal, all of which are presuppositions and are not necessarily true of any god that you want. If you want to imagine that God is not a purple unicorn, then fine and dandy, but it's entirely arbitrary.
Okay,
James, wait a second. Hold on a second. James, if we're going to argue from Zach's point of view, we have to know Zach's point of view, and we need to grant him his point of view. And therefore, he believes in an omnigod. I'm going to grant the existence of an omnigod, at least for the sake of argument, to see where that leads us.
Also trying to find out what the omnigod was doing. You're talking in an abstraction. I was curious to know what he was doing over the 200,000 years before.
Let's let Zach finish.
Yeah. So, okay. So here, the first point is that me personally, I don't think that I would reject the part where God can change the past, but that has to deal with because my own philosophical views on what time is. Because I don't think that the past or the future exist. I would be a presentist because I only think that the present currently exists. But even if we were to set that aside and then say that God can change the past, I don't think that it actually argues for the fact that you are currently unjustified in believing in your own existence, or even certain in your own existence. What that would do is it would say, right now, the phenomenon that you experience of being of existing, you can be certain that you currently exist, but you cannot be certain that you will persist throughout all time. Because it seems to me that if God goes back in time, and at some time t0 causes me to cease to exist, then the phenomenon that I was observing at t1 that justified my certainty in my own existence at t1 would no longer be there. So I don't think that you can actually say, you know what, you right now could possibly not exist because God could have erased you in the past. I don't think that you can actually get to that point, which is what I think would be necessary if you're trying to undercut undercut the presuppositionalist opinion or presuppositionalist certainty in his own existence. I think that To summarize, I think that the epistemic framework that you're using for whether you're a theist or a non-theist in your own existence, I think it's exactly identical.
Okay, so let's go that way, because if you're going to throw out the timeless nature of God, then I'm going to grant you as much as, well, I'm going to grant you everything, because I want to know what your view of God does to the reality. So let's say that there is nothing except the present, and we ignore Scripture as far as, you know, the beginning from the end, all that stuff. So God can't see the future.
Hold on just a minute. Let me make a comment on that.
Right.
I don't think the Scripture is determinative on God's relationship to time. Whether he's timeless or if he is within time is not something that is subject to Scripture. What Scripture does teach is he's everlasting throughout time. That's a separate argument, but I won't grant you the point that Scripture teaches anything about God's relationship to time, other than he's everlasting. Anyway. Okay,
and that's what I'm trying to do, is follow you right along with that. Whatever you believe, I want to go with, because I don't want to. One of my biggest pet peeves is people fighting straw men and forcing you into a belief that you don't have. So absolutely, if that's how you're interpreting the Scripture, great. We'll go with that. So what I want to know is outside, if we're going to have absolute certainty, outside our own existence, with which both of us are certain of, at least our own existence, not each other's existence, how can you be certain of anything, including the existence of God?
I mean, I'm not certain of anything.
Oh, well, okay, great. Well, I mean, then to me, that every precept, save yourself.
Zach is not a.
Yeah, I'm not a presuppositionalist.
Oh, my bad. I thought you were. That's why I was interested in what you're saying. Sorry.
No,
I didn't mean to color you like that.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, I'm a theist. I thought that's what you meant by granting my argument. Yeah, I'm a theist, but I'm not a presuppositionalist.
Okay, so
I think and that's
it.
With it.
I was trying to find out what his argument was.
Right.
200,000-year period before we get the cosmology that's actually written down in the Bible. I'm assuming that the omnipotent God was on hand and would presumably be observing everybody who did make stories about the cosmology. For me, it would seem peculiar that the deity would not be kind of jumping in there and correcting people when they were getting it wrong. Is that?
Well, in the way that I do science, I don't rely on divine revelation at all. I think that would just completely undermine the entire project. Now, if you want to do that and start getting like your witching sticks or your divining teas to talk to God and figure out what it is, you can do that. But I would rather do science through experiment and through understanding the natural world.
No, we're not. But the point is, if you was saying a story that the moon was actually cucumbers, would you be at fault for not extending your knowledge and explaining it to them?
I don't understand what that has to do with anything, honestly.
He's talking about Genesis. And
well, where was God in the long period when all of these false cosmologies were being developed that are the ones that apparently are folded into the Old Testament?
I think you and I have different concepts of what God's actions in the world are supposed to be. God is not some sort of, I guess, cheat sheet to give us answers to the scientific world. That's our own job. Because that's our own job. We're supposed to do that by ourselves. What God gives us is the divine revelation that we cannot understand by ourselves. You see?
Mm-hmm.
You see, God is in the project of communicating to people in the context in which they are. Just like if God were to break his silence and speak to me, he wouldn't speak to me in a language I didn't understand. Likewise, he wouldn't speak to me with things that I didn't understand.
When was the very first time that God communicated to a human being according to the theology?
My personal belief, probably about 150,000 years ago when he entered a covenant with Adam as a federal representative.
Oh, and so Adam lived 150,000 years ago?
Do what?
Adam lived 150,000 years ago?
That's just my personal speculation. I don't know if that's actually true or not.
That's why I want to know what. And when did Eve live?
Well, I mean, contemporaneously, right? And
there's some evidence to suggest that was possible?
No, I just said it was my own personal speculation based off of human migration patterns and things like that.
Okay. And what about all the Homo erectus that have been living before that? So there was no communication with anybody before that, right?
No, of course not. God did not have a covenant with them. He selected Adam as his federal representative. He entered covenant with them because he chose Adam's line in order to be the progenitor.
And this was in Africa?
Probably. I mean, that seems reasonable. They could have been Africa, or it could have been after the humans migrated out of Africa, and he selected someone once humanity was located in the Persian region. What's that called? Fertile Crescent. That's what I'm trying to say. Since the Bible does locate the Garden of Eden near the Tigris and Euphrates, so he selected those humans, placed them, entered in covenant with them, placed them in the Garden of Eden.
Or was that a real event or metaphorical or some?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Mixture?
Probably happened about 13,000 years ago. There's substantial geological evidence showing a localized catastrophe, which very likely would have wiped out a lot of people. Ark landed on Mount Judy, and then from there, God communicated with Noah and entered into another covenant with humanity.
Were all the animal kinds on the earth aboard the ark?
If by earth you mean Koretz, the land, yes. Every agricultural animal kind that was in the region that was relevant to Noah were on the ark. You can find it in the book of Enoch, I believe. There's a comprehensive list.
They were wiped out other than what was on the ark?
Could you repeat your question?
Why are we going through the book of Genesis? I'm just curious.
Could you repeat your question?
Bible, isn't it relevant?
I didn't hear what you said about things being wiped out. I just heard the tail end.
The purpose of the ark was to preserve things because a flood was going to kill things. Now, if we're going to talk a localized flood, and I'm assuming you're talking the Black Sea here, there's no evidence that any of the animals that could have been put on the ark went extinct other than what was on the ark. I don't think there's any genetic bottlenecks anyone's been able to determine on that, have there?
I mean, I don't know the data, but I don't know why there would be an extinction event. This was a localized catastrophe, not an extinction event.
Okay, so the story is largely metaphorical. Now, what about the Tower of Babel?
No, it's not largely metaphorical. No, you didn't understand anything I said. It is a localized catastrophe that wiped out humanity of that area.
But that's saying that you wipe out the humanity of the people that live in your neighborhood, but not that you're wiping out humanity, that you're preserving the animals on the ark except for all the animals that weren't on the ark that didn't get extinct. So they're just basically some people got on a boat and survived the flood, and the farm animals they kept with them survived. That's not the tale that we get either in the Babylonian ones that are the primary ones they copied, or
I'm talking about the Bible, not the Babylonian one. The Babylonian one probably is a myth, but the tale in the Bible is a much more realistic story. Look, I think that the Bible's story of a localized disaster with 8 survivors and their farm animals is a much more realistic tale than the Babylonian myths.
And so what about all the people that weren't on the ark? Nothing actually happened to them, did they? Right? So it's just local.
I'm not sure. Probably. Well, if they weren't in the region, then they wouldn't have been killed by a flood now, would they?
Chinese and Amerindians and all the other peoples that never get mentioned anywhere in the Bible, they're out of the covenant and so forth and so on. Now, on to the Tower of Babel.
Oh, God.
I
don't know what this has to do with presuppositionalism. I can do a Bible study with you, but I think the topic is presuppositionalism.
Well, I'm just kind of curious if you're not arguing. There are no presuppositions at all about any of the Bible, Tower of Babel, or flood or creation. That doesn't bump into presupposition.
Actually, the Tower of Babel has a pretty interesting, like far-reaching implications, like the Divine Council. Maybe I'd actually like to hear that. So if you want to go into that, we can, or we can change the subject.
I'm curious. Before he goes on, where is he? How are you coming up with the local flood interpretation? Where are you getting? What are you basing that on?
The Bible says that the flood was only 22.5 feet deep, and that won't cover the earth. That'll only flood the localized region. It also says Kor Eretz, which means the whole land, not the whole planet. And lastly, the animals that were on the ark listed in, I believe it's the book of First Enoch. I'd have to double check. The animals that are listed, and also if you cross-correlate that with Job, they're all animals that are localized to that region. They're also the only animals that are agriculturally useful. So they didn't load any insects on the board, on the ark, or any fish on the ark, or anything like that.
It seems like very close to the Epic of Gilgamesh, though.
How is that close to the Epic of Gilgamesh? Even if it is, that's kind of irrelevant. I'm not talking about the Epic of Gilgamesh. I'm talking about the localized disaster that the Bible.
Hey, Zach, someone said Kol Eretz means the whole planet.
Well, I'd be interested to know where they got that, because literally no Hebrew scholar in the entire universe would agree with that.
Yeah, isn't it true also that the Pishon River in Genesis 3 also used the same term?
Well, not just that, but there are numerous sections throughout the entire Pentateuch, well, not even the Pentateuch, but the entire Tanakh that uses Kor Eretz that has nothing to do with the entire planet. In fact, there is a phrase, which it escapes my mind, because I only know.
Okay, Floyd just said that is false, but it's not. If you look at you'll see the same phrase "cholerets" in Genesis 1, referring to the Pishon River. And if you're correct, then that would have to be a global river, which it obviously is not.
Yeah, it isn't.
Okay, we're actually getting complaints from the audience that we've strayed away from presuppositionalism. So I'd like to get us back on track. Zach, what do you think of presuppositionalism? Broad strokes.
Broad strokes. I heard a little bit of your early broadcast. I think that even though there are many of my Christian brothers and sisters who would use this methodology, and I think that they do it because they think that they're glorifying God, I really don't think that I don't think it does what they think it does, because I think at the end of the day, the most you can prove is that it's an internally consistent point of view. But something that's internally consistent isn't necessarily something that's true.
Yeah.
And I always forget who's used this. There's a thing called the parable of the invisible gardener, where there are two fellows walking in the woods, and they encounter an area in the woods that appears to be it appears to have been tilled, and there have been plants that are put there, and things like that. And so they hypothesize, you know what, I bet there's a gardener that comes out here. And the other guy says, actually, no, I don't think that there is a gardener that tends to this place anymore. And so, long story short, they set up all these tests where they bring bloodhounds in, they put flour on the ground to look for footsteps, they spend the whole night there looking for them. And at the end of the day, the guy that says that there's a gardener, he keeps pulling it back. He says, well, it's an invisible gardener, that's why we can't see him. Well, he's a weightless gardener, that's why he doesn't see that, you don't see his footprints. Well, he's invisible to bloodhounds, so that's why you can't smell him. And I think that that's more or less what presuppositionalism does, that sure, you can come up with a point of view with like this invisible gardener that's consistent with all of the evidence, but it's not predictive of the evidence. It doesn't show, it doesn't actually show that it's true or false. The invisible gardener and no gardener are equally consistent with the data. And likewise, I think that if you show that Christianity is the only internally consistent worldview, if you will, that doesn't actually show that it's true, because you can come up with an entirely false worldview that's internally consistent and coherent with external data. But unless it's predictive or unless there's some evidential basis for it, I don't think that you can get much further than that. So that's my chief argument against presuppositionalism.
Oh, Floyd, I didn't realize it was you that I was talking to in the chat. How's it going? Oh, so hey, Heavy, I see you joined too. You wanna jump in?
Well, I just jumped in and y'all got on track as I was coming in. I was just going to say that I was listening to Zach's answers, and Zach, I'm going to say this, and you may agree or tell me to shut up or whatever, but you sound more moderate and not a strict literalist, and a lot of the answers you was giving were pretty reasonable, a lot more than we usually get, to be honest, about localized flood and about Adam wasn't, I think you said Adam was not the first man, but he was the guy that God chose to, do the covenant with or whatever. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd love to talk about colerts with you, because I think you're completely wrong. You're even wrong about what Jewish scholars say. Colerts is actually only used once in the Noah story. That's in verse 7:3. Nowhere else is it used in the flood story. But you can see throughout the Old Testament, it is used as to mention the whole planet as they viewed it. Of course, they didn't view the planet as round. They view it as flat with a firmament over it. So that's the context, and we should try to understand it.
Yeah.
And there's no reason why God couldn't reveal to them that the earth is round.
You mean 7:13? You said 7:3.
7:3.
Okay.
Yeah. And there goes me and Floyd getting off track again.
I can actually. You should watch my debate I had with General Han Solo on this very topic. He didn't. I can go over my slides with colerts.
I don't know. I think the audience wants us to talk about presuppositionalism. Okay. We kind of went off on a tangent there when we.
Hey, Floyd. How about you post the link to that video in the comments, and because I haven't seen that, but I'd like to go back and look at it myself.
Sure.
Yeah, Floyd's pretty sharp. I was in another great debate community chat with him, and he was doing pretty well. So it's probably a good debate.
One thing I'd just like to interject, Zachary, you're definitely the people that I like to talk to. And the reason being is because and I hate to put it this way, but we get so accused of attacking low-hanging fruit. And for lack of a better term, the people who are the literalists are the ones who are the easiest to catch in contradictions and going all, just the low-hanging fruit, sorry. But with you, because you do seem like someone who has put thought into this and tried to square the circles with actual science, actual historical evidence, your beliefs to me are very, very interesting and very, and could be compelling. So, I'd definitely like to talk to you again, man.
Sure, I'll come to all the hangouts that Richard drags me into.
Yeah, actually, I dragged him into this one. I also dragged him into a debate with Kent Hovind. He didn't want to do it, but I forced him to. So that was pretty nice.
Yeah, and Richard, you're the same way, by the way. I meant to tell you that. So, and before we get too far, thanks for all the time you put into that. I hope you got my responses to your blog.
Oh, you respond? No, I didn't see it. Where is it?
It should have been in both. It should have been. I tried to post it on the blog, and I also posted it on the.
Okay. I didn't get a notification. I'll go back and look at it. Thanks.
Okay. No problem. Thank you.
So yeah, I guess another thing related to presuppositionalism, we'll try to go back into that, and I'm just trying to think of ideas related to that, would be this idea that you have to start with God epistemologically. I don't know how much sense that makes. Maybe you guys can correct this or expand on it, but I think you can't start outside of yourself, like epistemologically. You can't start with God, because then by assuming God, you're also thinking, and you have your own existence, and you have the fact that you can interact with God and learn things about the world by thinking. So I think even if you say you're starting with God, you still have the axiomatic beliefs that everyone else does. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, to even understand God or accept God's revelation, you have to have a thinking mind and reliable senses and so forth. Now, a presuppositionalist will say, well, my God gave you those things. Mm. Well, that's fine, but a humanist, a naturalist could say, they evolved from evolution. That just simply tells you where they came from, but you still have to presuppose that they are reliable to begin with. It's irrelevant where they came from. They're either reliable or they're not. We presuppose they are reliable, and to say, God gave you them, or nature gave you them, is irrelevant. It doesn't matter what the source is. They're either reliable or they're not, to be able to receive revelation, regardless if it's special revelation or general revelation.
Yeah. And that, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I might even push back on that a little bit, Floyd, is that, I think that a better approach would be to understand that they're not reliable. And therefore, even if we do get divine revelation, we have to deal with the problems of, do we have the ability to receive it and interpret it flawlessly? So, I mean, it's the same thing as looking at a picture on the wall. I guarantee you, MC Escher can make you see things that cannot exist. So I think that even that presupposition that we have senses that are reliable, that's tough to demonstrate.
Yeah, that's why I'd say we're all in the same epistemic boat. We're all fallible human beings, regardless if there's a God or not. And even in the Christian worldview, humans are fallible. We sin. We're capable of making mistakes. We're not all knowing, and so forth. So in both worldviews, we have to accept any revelation, regardless of the source, through our limited capabilities. Regardless.
Absolutely, and that's exactly where I'm at, is at least trying to get us both in the same boat of solipsism, and where we can branch from there.
Yeah.
But
I mean, evidence of fallible human beings interpreting scripture is evident in all the different interpretations of the Bible. Who's correct? Is Calvinism or Arminianism correct?
You could say something similar about science, couldn't you? Like, you have fallible human beings trying to understand the natural world, and you often have people conflicting. So, yeah, I totally agree about that.
Yeah, and that's absolutely, and that's why I like science, because at least we try not to make those assumptions that we're right before we walk in, and not only that, but we allow it to be, or mandate that it's vetted by independent sources. So that's where the strength comes in. Once we just say, "Oh, this is infallible," we got problems, no matter what it is.
Yeah. Well, science has done the same all over the world. We can't really say that about religion, though.
Exactly.
Hey, Richard, I got a question for you.
All right.
Gary, that was on here earlier, I'm sorry he had to leave because he was the only pre-supper here.
Oh,
He was claiming he had a different argument than Van Til. Do you know where he was going with that?
No, I wasn't sure what he was talking about, because he was kind of defending the Van Tilian presup side for a little while. So I wasn't totally sure what he was doing. He might say something like he presupposes theism, but not necessarily Christian theism. I'm not totally sure. I know he did say that Van Til was a brilliant man, and he respected him and Greg Bonson. So he might just dislike Cy ten Bruggenkate's approach to Van Tilian apologetics, even if he still likes the argument.
Okay.
Maybe it was a Clarkian.
Yeah,
I'm not sure, Floyd. Or
okay,
he may have been.
So Ned, I'm looking at my article and the comments, and I don't see it there.
Really?
That's
nuts.
Did you say that you left on Google Plus?
Well, remember, I think you linked it on Google Plus, or where you put it.
Okay, so you left it in that. Yeah, I get so many notifications from Google Plus that I must have just overlooked.
But I also replied on the blog itself. I copied and pasted, so I don't know why it's not showing up there. That's strange.
I don't know. I need to do something about this plugin, because like the Facebook plugin that I have on there, it has problems sometimes where it just wipes all the comments clean, and yeah, I don't. That could be it. So I think I'm just going to change it from the Facebook plugin to people just actually commenting on the site.
Okay. Yeah. If you can't find it, let me know. Hopefully I can find it and cut and paste it again.
I'm sure it's on Google Plus and on the post that I originally wrote.
And in fact, I'm almost positive on Google Plus, because I made 2 comments, one long one right before I went to bed, and then the next morning I'd been thinking about it more and made another one. So there should be one under, my name, Ned Purdom, and then there should be one under negation of P, because of course I logged in twice under 2 different names. So.
Yeah, I remember reading his. Okay, yeah, yep. I see your comment. Okay, yep, I've got it.
Okay, great.
So, do we have anything else related to presup that we want to cover?
I just want to mention that I did 3 presentations on presuppositionalism. It's available on my YouTube channel if anyone's interested.
Okay, what's your YouTube channel?
It's if you just search on Floyd FP.
Floyd FP. Okay.
I've seen all 3 of them, Floyd, and they're very good.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, I've written several critiques of Presup too. A lot of the content we already covered here, so I won't plug myself. So. What's
your channel, Richard?
My channel, it's just my name, but I don't really use my channel that much. I write more than I do making videos. Pretty much because it's hard building up the audience and getting people to watch it. But I do like doing it on this because you actually have people tuning in. But my website, if you want to check that out, is thereforegodexists.com, and you'll see Against Van Tilianism on the menu to the left, and you can check that out. Yeah. Okay, so I don't know. Maybe we'll wrap up now. I think we've unless any of you guys have another avenue you want to cover.
No, I want to tell Floyd also. I enjoy that Presup series too, man. So good job there.
Oh, thanks.
Okay, I haven't heard much from who is officially. I can't remember the whole name, but hey, officially, you still there? All right. So Steve usually gives one person the last word, so I'll do that here. Ned, you want to take the last word? Then we'll go offline.
Not really. I have nothing to say, but good night.
Okay, Zach, you want to try it?
Sure, yeah. I think if there are any presuppositionalists watching this, they need to submit their apologetic to the Lordship of Christ and accept the evidentialist framework for all of their epistemology. Jesus Christ gave us evidence, so we would be impious to refuse it.
All right. Thanks, Zach. Thanks, everyone, for being here. And thank you to the Great Debate Community audience for listening in. Remember to like and subscribe to our channel. And be sure to watch out for next time, because I'll probably be hosting more of these debates and roping Zach into them. The next one might be something more that we would actually disagree on, like maybe one of the arguments for God's existence. So we'll see how that goes. But anyway, thanks for listening and have a great night, guys.